Thursday noon. You probably know who we are already, but if not, Been There Got Out offers hope, guidance, and community to people suffering in or struggling to get out of relationships with narcissists and other toxic personality types so that they can find the strength they need to get their sanity back. Yes. And what we do on Thursdays is take questions from our audience, get them from various places. We're very easy to reach. There's a contact us right on our homepage at BeenThereGotOut.com. Lisa does a great job managing our Instagram feed and gets lots of questions there, a lot of and answers.
Yes,
right?
yes.
And I spend time on Quora. We have our Facebook page, our Twitter, so we're very easy to find. You can also, if you're joining us live, put a question right in the question box or the
chat,
whatever it is. I've never viewed us live because we're doing it live.
Yes.
But we'll check a little bit later on in today's broadcast and see if there are any questions. But we've got a full slate as usual.
I know.
Yeah.
We're gonna run out of time, we always do.
Always.
Okay, want to get to it?
Yeah.
I'm gonna ask the question.
Okay.
Because I'm gonna talk more, but you're gonna answer.
Oh, you are?
Yeah.
Well, I'm gonna talk a lot, but okay.
Okay. So, what is the most painful part of a narcissistic discard?
I've been through that.
Yes.
As I'm sure a lot of us have been.
Right.
I think for me it was sort of that sheer bewilderment, like that sense of being completely blindsided. Like what happened, especially what happened to that once beautiful relationship we had, because that's how you maybe view it at the time, that things used to be really great and all of a sudden.
Quick question, sorry to interrupt you. Are we blurry? I feel like we're blurry.
We're blurry?
Yeah, I think our camera's blorry.
Well, it should.
Sorry to interrupt.
Autofocus.
But I'm like, I'm glancing and we look very blurry. And I want to make sure it doesn't record blurry. All right, if we're blurry, I don't know what we can do about it.
I don't feel blurry.
I know, but don't you look blurry?
I do look blurry. But you know what? I don't think I can solve that on the fly.
All right, so we're going to keep going.
We're going to
keep going.
Power through.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry.
So again, it's this sense of like what happened to this once beautiful relationship we had, and in hindsight, I think a lot of us in recovery realized that it wasn't really all that beautiful, but it seems like it at the time, right? And that's the sense I had, especially like. You've been the one who's been trying, right? Typically, like I was going to therapy. I was trying to be a better partner towards the final stages of my marriage. So you're the one trying, and they discard you, like just so out of sync. And there's this sort of Jekyll and Hyde thing, right? You talk about this all the time. Where your relationship is with two people, right? There's the good side and the bad side, and when the bad side finally takes over and the relationship ends, that part was horrible, but you tend to, especially if you're an empath, you tend to remember the good side, right?
Yeah,
you
that's that whole
person.
Cognitive dissonance.
Right.
Like, but I want to go back to the days of like when I was his or her soulmate.
Yeah, because you see that Dr. Jekyll side, the good side, more early on, right? They're showing you that.
Yeah.
So. And also at the time when a discard happens, we're usually really compromised emotionally. Our perception of things is all skewed up. And it's exactly like, it literally is exactly like somebody coming out of a cult, right? It has the same impact on your brain. You've been brainwashed, just like cults do to the people that they suck in. It's not funny at all, but it's interesting because I did once know somebody who had been in a cult. And he was freshly out of it, and he was like completely disoriented. He had no idea what sort of normal was. And looking back, I'm like, that's how I felt. It was a different cause, but that's absolutely how I felt.
Yeah.
So you said you're going to talk a lot. Let's see it.
Okay, well actually I forgot, but I think I wrote a blog on this. Not on the painful part of it, but what a narcissistic discard is.
You did?
I did, and we covered this a lot also in the Common Manipulation Tactics workshop. But so I posed this question to our Instagram community and got a lot of responses, which really covered much of what most people feel. So I thought that we could use the responses as a jumping off point.
Okay.
So one person said, who's very prominent and actually a therapist in the narcissistic abuse community, said, learning the truth. And that was like a huge theme throughout many of these other responses. You know, the truth about who the person was, what the relationship was not. That was I know, the biggest thing for me too.
Yeah, it was early on
20 years.
after I was discarded that I learned about, I should have realized it earlier, but the
Everybody
infidelity.
says that. Yeah, everybody says that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Another person said realizing almost everything they said was a lie. That hit hard.
Mhm.
Yeah. So that's one of the hardest things to let go of these toxic relationships, is actually believing that even the good stuff in the beginning was fake, and that they never really loved you. Another person said, when all I have ever wanted was love, and it turned out to be a fake, painful game.
Mhm.
And the game part of it, where someone could just play with your emotions like that,
Yeah.
have no regard for you as a human being, is really stunning.
And that's part of the pain too, right? Like when they discard you, it doesn't seem to affect them.
No.
And here you are, like miserable.
I know, and then they just pop on to the next supply.
Yeah.
I know,
You're
these are
just
all...
that's what the word discard means, right?
Right.
You're just a piece of
Yeah.
trash.
Right, right.
Toss you aside.
Yeah, this is all like, so many people have the same feeling. Another person said, the loss of the life you were promised and changed your life to accomplish. You know, like Chris, you said earlier, it's like you've done everything you could to make it work. I know
Yeah.
I did too, and so many of us blame ourselves and think we have control over keeping the relationship together, and how much are you willing to give and to sacrifice? Another person said the rejection, the facing up to reality of all the lies and the destruction, him taking no accountability, the shame, the embarrassment. Oh, this is so familiar. It's like, even though this happened years ago, it's fresh. You know, as soon as I hear someone say exactly how I feel, I'm like, I remember.
Right.
So,
And how many times, do we hear that people, like, they just wanted their family to be intact if they're kids, right? They didn't want to, yeah, well, me too.
Yeah, yeah.
They didn't want, and they didn't want to be perceived as someone who had failed, like a failed marriage.
Right.
You take ownership of that.
Right, right. Or have the other person blame you that you're the one.
Mhm.
I'm the one for breaking up the family, for finally getting out. Yeah. Another person said being treated like you never existed. Yeah, and the emotional and psychological abuse that happens over time when you're in a relationship for a while with a narcissist or a toxic personality, it's not even at the discard. It's for a lot of the time you were together that you were treated like you didn't exist.
Yep.
Somebody else said the emptiness is keeping her awake almost all night. Yes, I know. I think we're all familiar with that.
Yeah.
You know, like spinning, like how and why, and you're trying to put a rational stamp on something that makes no sense. So, another person said, doubting myself. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe it wasn't that bad, and maybe I was the narcissistic part of the relationship. This is such another common feeling, and we all feel like it's just us,
Yep.
And the narcissist will make you feel like you're the one who you're the one with the problem. I know my ex used to say, he used to want me to chant out loud, I'm an abuser, I'm an abuser. He'd be like, hold my hand, say it. And I was just like, no. But it was sort of like, did I do something? Like, what did I do? But that's,
Right.
yeah, it is like that cultish thing, like just repeat after me.
Mhm.
It's crazy. Another person said, when you realize he's going to do the same thing to the next person. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that this was the answer to the worst part of the discard. That, you're still so concerned about somebody else getting hurt instead of even dealing with your own pain,
Right. A lot of people think, like, they get, let's say, like you were cheated on, they left you for their next supply,
Right.
which is all the time, right?
Right.
It happens all the time. So many people want to reach out to that person
Oh, I
and,
know.
and say, look out,
I know.
There's trouble here. I remember that feeling.
We should put that down for a question about why you should not do that. It's not a good idea, because I'll just go off on a tangent and talk about that for 10 minutes.
Sorry.
Yeah, that's okay. That's okay. Just make a mental note. Okay. Another person gave a longer thing, that everything he stood for was the exact opposite of what he actually was. That he was knowing everything that came out of his mouth was a fabrication or lie of omission, knowing my daughters will have to be alone with this sick bleep one day, and he will try to make them doubt their reality or hurt them. That's the worst. Thankfully, he's too lazy to be in their lives consistently now or a decent parent. But his history of abuse is haunting and something he likes to conceal from everyone with his good guy image. Thank goodness for FKA Twigs. This is someone in the news now. I won't even get into that. But for showing this can happen to anyone, even famous, successful women who have never endured abuse. It's not in your head, and you're not alone. Absolutely. And the thing, we'll get a little bit more into co-parenting with the narcissist, something that this woman touched on here in a later question. Yeah, it just resonates so much, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
All of it.
Yeah.
All of it. Like my mind's reeling with like, oh, that's that example.
Right. And even it doesn't matter, female, male, it's, you know, such similar feelings. Everything was a lie, and having to deal with the aftermath, trying to explain to your children that their other parent isn't who they thought he was and who he truly is. Yeah. And that
dicey subject.
Yeah, dicey subject.
Yeah.
Did we talk? I don't remember if we talked about that last week a little bit, but we're going to talk about that more in a few minutes.
Yeah.
Okay, having no one to turn to, the feeling of isolation because your entire social circle revolved around the narcissist. And now they have followed their leader and discarded you too. So this is like the flying monkeys. And trust me, everyone is against you. They post on social media, them all going out, having fun, maybe even with his new supply. And meanwhile, you're just home alone, feeling miserable, no friends, no support system, no nothing, because he made sure to isolate you from your loved ones or turn them against you. Oh, this is so typical and part of this whole notion that we get into called coercive control, where they strip away everything and you're alone. And this is part of why they do it, is to keep you dependent on them, because who can get out when they have nothing, especially no support. So it's really hard. Yeah, that's another big topic, the isolation. Someone else said, this is the last one I'm going to say because it leads nicely into the next question.
Okay.
For me, it was almost mind-bending how invisible I felt. His sister told me about 2 weeks after I'd left, quote, "It's as though you were never there." That makes me think of felt like I never existed. I'd lived with him for 4 years. It was like that entire time was a lie, or that I'd never been there. It's the ultimate gaslighting experience. I want everyone listening to note that these responses also include from people who are therapists and experts who help others heal from narcissistic abuse, because that was one of them. Anyway, speaking of gaslighting, that goes nicely, like I said, into the next thing. Our next question was, if you are or were with a narcissistic partner, what's the most outrageous story of gaslighting or other NPD, narcissistic personality disorder, behavior that you have?
Yeah, so we've heard some stories.
Yeah.
And some of them,
they're laughable when you have enough distance.
Yeah.
They're just outrageous.
So, I don't know how outrageous mine is, but just sharing a story from my own, decade plus marriage to, my severe malignant narcissist ex. Of course, she blamed me for everything in her life that wasn't working out, right? And we have, I still have, a nice, modest house in a good neighborhood in the suburbs of New York City, and she had grown up very wealthy, and she constantly would lament, like from very early on in the relationship, how pitiful our home was. What a hovel. She carped about every little imperfection. She'd walk around, and this was so weird. And it's older, right? It's from the 1970s. So I don't know how many people in our audience can remember this show, but there was a show called Sanford and Son. And there was a famous comedian named Red Fox who was the star of the show, and he played this older guy who he and his son lived in a home that was in a junkyard. And the junkyard was his business. And so there was a lot of like dilapidated surroundings and that kind of thing. And she would walk around the house humming the theme song to that show, right? Because this is the horrible conditions she lived in. It was ridiculous. because it's a nice home, and that's one of my favorite things about being now just about 7 years out of that relationship, is that I can love my house again.
I'm wondering if you're gonna.
No.
Okay.
So, but just getting more specific in terms of outrageous gaslighting. This was not that outrageous a story, but it was very impactful to me because it really illustrated how spun around I was. So our kitchen sink had a little strip of Formica in front of it, like just about everybody's does, and sometimes water would pool there, and like she complained about how there was some kind of leak and wanted me to call a plumber about this water that was just on the counter. Why? And then that discussion about there being water on the counter, it became, this is another example of the horrible life you've given me, this horrible home.
I was actually washing dishes in his kitchen the other day, and pots and pans, and it splashed. So I know what you're talking about. It's not a leak.
No, I know that.
It's splashing.
Yes, I know. So I was confounded by this problem, right? And despite the fact that I watched my ex and our babysitter splashing water carelessly when they were doing like dishes or whatever, just getting water. And if I weren't so completely brainwashed, I would have obviously seen this is how the water got there. This is where the leak was coming from. And I have a very good friend who, he's not a professional handyman, but he is very handy. He knows household stuff. He's great at that stuff. And I asked where the leak could be coming from, and he looked at me like I was nuts,
Yeah.
And I guess I was, right? Because I've been so spun around. But as Lisa touched on earlier, I find humor in this stuff now, and it helps me, to laugh at it. It helps me in my recovery, from many years of narcissistic abuse. And I'm out of that relationship 7 years now. And I'm still in the home, which I said, as I mentioned, I love again. I don't feel this overwhelming guilt of, forcing my wife to live in such a hovel. And by the way, the sink hasn't leaked, since then.
No, unless me washing dishes.
Yeah, well, I do it too. And then, you know what, I wipe it up and life goes on.
Yeah. Maybe she wasn't familiar with washing dishes.
All right. Doesn't matter.
I know.
Doesn't matter.
Yeah. So, I was going to say, it's usually later when we understand exactly what it is that we can laugh about it. But I so wish that I had understood what gaslighting was at the time, as well as projection, because those were the two freakiest.
Projection was the biggest.
Yeah, the
first
behaviors that I couldn't make any sense of while they were happening. So I also don't know if I have a crazy gaslighting story. There were a lot of smaller ones, which I think I've mentioned in various videos, like the girl's underwear in the dryer that clearly wasn't mine, but he kept insisting that it was my underwear. I know what my underwear looks like. There was a roll of cash that I discovered in his underwear drawer, actually.
There's a theme here.
Yeah, which he swore that I had given him in dribs and drabs as an allowance, while insisting at the same time that his multiple rental properties were making no money. It was clear it was like rent, a lot of it. There was once a receipt in his pocket that I found when I was doing laundry, which pegged him as being at a place in New York City that he insisted that he hadn't actually gone. Of course, he had been cheating. He was saying that the receipt probably belonged to somebody else, like the former owner of the pants, and it was just so ridiculous, these crazy details that it's not even worth spending time unraveling. And I wish I hadn't spent so much time trying to make sense of it back then. But the thing was that as I was going through it at the time, there were so many instances that I felt in my gut that what he was saying made no sense. I knew it wasn't true. I knew that what he was saying had never happened, but I didn't believe myself because I think I couldn't have come to terms with the fact that he was lying. And so many times he was lying.
Right, and really that's gaslighting at its core, right? They spin a story and just pound it, right? And make it to the point where, your logical brain says this isn't true. It's obviously not true. but they beat on you with it so hard that you question yourself.
Well, they
That's the
say, well,
whole
how,
problem.
so like they make you feel like, how dare you question me,
Mhm.
the narcissist, and it's like you're putting your belief in them over your belief in yourself, and that's how things really erode.
Yeah.
Okay, I think
Okay.
this is going to be our last one because this is going to be a long one.
Yeah. Well, the first two weren't short ones.
All right, so I'll ask the question again, and you go first.
Okay.
This is like two that sort of go together.
And we get a lot like this.
Yes,
Yeah.
and I feel like I want to do something more than a Facebook Live.
Sure.
And one question about it because it's such a
big
huge
topic.
topic. Okay, and this question was, what can a parent do to minimize the possible damage caused by the other parent's narcissistic personality disorder? And how can I help prevent my kids from developing a personality disorder when their other parent has NPD?
Yeah. Yeah, which would be like a subset of the first one, right?
Yeah. It's just like
Damage
kids
can-
and parent with NPD.
Right.
Ugh.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is a tough one.
Mm-hmm.
And it's one very near to my heart. You know, as I'm in the same situation, it's actually probably the single biggest concern in my life right now.
As it is for most parents.
Yeah, because we share custody.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, so first, like if you're still in the relationship with the narcissistic parent, it's especially hard because once the relationship goes bad, you know, the conflict is likely to be pretty close to constant. You know, and that's terrible for kids to be in a war zone in effect, right? So if you can get out and you can move on to healing yourself from the abuse, and, you know, and really, if you can live the best life you possibly can, that's going to help the kids. And the idea of another thing we hear a lot, the idea of staying for the kids to keep the family intact for benefit of the kids, not a good idea. Rarely a good idea.
Yeah.
So second, you know, as confusing as it can be for the kids when you enforce boundaries, like to go no or low contact, like I have, you know, it really helps because, you know, what I've found is it's better than them witnessing the conflict that's inevitable when you interact with a narcissist, right? Because there was a time, like, after our breakup where I would still like go to therapy sessions with her, go to doctor's appointments with her.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, 6 or 7 times out of 10, it would be okay. A couple times there'd be a lot of tension and the kids pick up on that.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And then 1 or 2 times out of 10, there would be open conflict and nastiness and, you know, and I never knew what I was going to get. So it's better just, you know, to have those, you know, have those boundaries in place. We talk about that in one of our workshops, right? The gray rocking and no contact.
Yes.
Right. So my kids are 17 and 14 now, and I'm almost 7 years out of the marriage. And it took me a while to learn about boundaries. So when the kids ask why I refuse to be anywhere near their mother, I mean, I wouldn't sit near her, just no interaction. I didn't demean her at all, right? That's important. But I just explained that, you know, our relationship was broken and that for whatever reason, we could not interact in a healthy way, at least not regularly or reliably. So I preferred to avoid the potential conflict by keeping my distance. And they didn't love this. They probably still don't, you know, but they've come to understand my viewpoint,
Mm-hmm.
you know. And everyone's different but from what I've learned, you know, kids in these situations have a pretty good shot. You know, this is sort of there's some hope, right? As long as one of the parents is a healthy presence in their lives. So going back to what I said earlier, the best thing you can do is to heal yourself and be the best parent you can be. So be a great role model, exhibit empathy, right? Talk about feelings with your kids. Don't rip the other parent, but do explain your reasons when you disagree with them, right? So I don't like, I disagree with the opinion your mother has, but I'm not criticizing the person. And that's a kind of advanced concept for especially younger kids to
Older
get.
kids too.
Yeah,
Yeah, we
true.
just had a
Even adults.
conversation
Yeah,
about
we were
this.
just talking
Yeah.
about this.
Mhm.
Yep. So, you know, emotionally healthy people don't tolerate being treated the way that narcissists treat others. So, you know, if you take steps to protect yourself, you are modeling for them emotionally healthy behavior, right?
And a lot of kids will, you know, figure it out especially when they see one person say, I'm not going to tolerate bad behavior. I mean, we've heard that from a
Right.
lot of people we know in this situation.
Right, absolutely. So, and then when they get older, if they're emotionally healthy, there's probably going to be some kind of fallout, right, with the narcissistic parent. Either they're going to stay under the spell,
But
or
not always, and that goes into the other part of the question.
sure, and if this might happen in their 20s, 30s, 40s. We see plenty of adults talking about narcissistic parents, right? So, and that's a bumpy road.
It is.
Right,
It
bumpy road.
is, because we know people whose kids have gone both ways.
Right, and so professional therapy can be a great help to both kids and you in dealing with it. But please be careful to pick a therapist that understands narcissistic abuse, because it's really shocking how many mental health professionals, like even highly reputable ones, they just don't get it. And I've been through that exact situation with a parenting coordinator that's one of the most highly regarded in our area, and he'd written a book, all kinds of stuff, and he was like recommending we sit together at school events, and for the good of the kids. And I was just like, this was even after I explained how unhealthy, like even dangerous, our interactions could be. And then the last thing is, like, please just understand that you can't control everything. So even if you do everything right, and none of us is perfect, your kids are probably still going to face challenges, depending on the severity of the situation. So don't drive yourself crazy worrying about what you can't control.
I just restrained myself from interrupting you. So now I want to add to the thought of what you said just before the last thing regarding the therapists. I think regarding my own kids, what has been really helpful with the therapy they got early on was, we also had a bumpy road finding a good therapist. But the ones that worked, and I have a boy and a girl, were the ones that really got them to tap into their emotional life, to really get in touch with their feelings and how they feel about situations, because many kids of narcissists are like us, where they are so empathic that they put others' needs ahead, and they will focus on doing what they need to do to meet the needs of the narcissistic parent. And so, like us, they are completely blind to how they themselves feel. And I felt like a couple of therapists in particular, my son in particular, who I'll get into a minute about my own issues with that, but he used to never talk about his feelings with anything. And the therapist that we got for him was a man, and he spent quite a bit of time talking about things unrelated to my son's emotional life, right in the throes of like the split, when you'd think this is now when you need to talk about it. And when I asked the therapist why they were still talking about politics and debate and chess, the therapist said, I want him to get comfortable with me, and I want to establish a rapport. But my son went to that therapist for like maybe 2 years or so, and in the second year, I'm not sure if it was even in the first year, but it shifted. Something shifted. There were some transitions and some clashes, but suddenly my son really was much more tapped into his emotional life, which he had never in his life ever really dealt with, and that has helped a lot in terms of, for my son, having self-reflection, which many narcissists don't have. But to keep talking about my kids in a more specific sense too, is my kids were older when we split, and so a lot of the parenting, even before we split, included things that I didn't agree with. So while we were still together, I was concerned, not even knowing what narcissism was, and everybody has things that they are not on the same page with, but it was really, really upsetting, because my ex used to, with my son in general, who's the older of my two kids, he used to lead my son to the belief that whatever bad things he did, even as a young child, he could somehow avoid the consequences if he did something to take it back. And you've heard me talk about this a lot. So I was constantly being undermined with discipline. And many of you know that my background is in education, and I had a lot of practice dealing with kids from 7th graders all the way through college. Plus, I was a camp counselor with younger kids. So it's, you really have to establish things in the beginning, and you have to be consistent. And so it was so frustrating to have someone basically undo whatever I was trying to teach my son in particular with the discipline. And I think that having that where, I'd say something and then my ex would be like, no, that's okay, you can get out of it. It made my son push the boundaries. And you know him well. He pushes the boundaries a lot.
He's a boundary pusher.
Yeah, yes, girl. So when my ex moved out, my son was in high school. And, I have to say some of what he learned from his father was good in some ways. Like, my son is defiant and he is constantly pushing back, and that made him a champion debater on the national level. So, it did teach him some skills, but he was a pain in the butt, and he still is. He's a pain in the butt to deal with because it just always, he thinks he knows more. He is still, he's an adult now, but still on the verge of adolescence. But his main issue, and I think being the child of a narcissist, is he had a sense of superiority and he had a lack of empathy. And I really do believe that was a direct result of that sort of parenting. And my ex used to kind of bond with him on the belief that the two of them were above everyone else. And he used to praise my son for agreeing with him on that. And that caused some problems in my son's social life, to have that superior attitude.
Right, so, and that's totally right up the alley of narcissists, right? Yeah. Like, I'm above it.
Right.
The rules don't apply to me.
Yep.
All that stuff. So it was almost like he was training him.
He was. Right. He was. And so having that happen for so many years, well into my son's adolescence, I have had to try to undo the damage. And I have had to actively practice something with my son. It's these specific exercises. I'm not going to say what we call them, but I'll just say there's exercises I do where I force him to feel what it's like to have no voice. Mm-hmm. It may seem cruel from the outside, people who don't understand what I'm doing at the time, or they think it's really funny if they know us, but I want him to experience what it's like to have no voice. And the reason is I want him to know what it feels like to deal with someone like him who acts like your opinion doesn't matter. Mm-hmm. And he hates it.
It's holding up a mirror.
Yeah, exactly. He hates it. And so I have put him in scenarios where he is forced to listen to other people and keep his mouth shut. And I've also made it really clear that during certain times, I'll say straight up to him, your feelings don't matter. Nobody cares about your needs. And nobody cares about your input. And people, again, who don't know, so like, right. Oh my God, you're so cruel. I'm like, no.
Right, hopefully you don't do this like at the grocery store, right?
But I think that this is a necessary skill for him to develop. I want him to develop humility and sensitivity. He needs this. It has made him a better person. He doesn't like it, but it has worked to some extent. And even though he's on the edge of adulthood, he still needs constant reminders. And again, this isn't just with a child or a teenager or an adult child of a narcissist, but I think with many adolescents and people his age. And I just have so much to say on this topic. Like I said, I think we need another setting to discuss it. But it is a very, I know, sorry, we went over time again. I do think, I said we would. It's a reasonable concern for parents to have, because I've seen firsthand, like I noted, I didn't want to interrupt Chris too much before, but I've seen again, directly, the tremendous impact that a narcissistic parent can have on his or her own children, especially in terms of grooming them to be just like them, to be a narcissist. And I myself have felt powerless while witnessing a particular person that I love. I'm watching it happen, and I can't do anything about it. And I've seen this person and this person's spouse basically laying the foundation to raise a narcissist with the type of parenting that's going on, but that's a whole other issue.
Mm-hmm.
But we have to stop.
Yes, we do.
Boundaries.
Yes, usually we talk about whatever meal we're going to have.
I know.
right?
Then we'll just say I've got to
So
have
it's lunchtime.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to take a quick look
I know.
to see if we've got any.
No, people usually send
questions.
questions ahead of time.
Yeah. So there isn't anything here right now, but of course, as I said at the beginning, we're very easy to reach. I'm not going to go over it again.
Yeah.
You can just, if you know we've been there, got out, you
Right,
can find us.
right. And we also didn't get to all the questions as usual from today, so we'll continue next Thursday.
All right.
But thanks again for coming. I hope we're still not blurry. It looks like we're blurry.
We can, we're going to be all substance, no style this week.
Okay. All right.
All right.
Hope to see you next week.
All right.
Bye.
Take care.